Why? Trying harder is making you fall further. Behind, there is an ancient principle, one that predates modern psychology, neuroscience, and every self-help book ever written, that quietly dismantles everything you think you know about success, desire, and the nature of getting what you want. It is not complex. In fact, its simplicity is what makes it so difficult to accept. The harder you chase something, the faster it runs. Water cupped in a desperate clenched fist slips through your fingers. But water held in an open, relaxed palm gathers on its own. This is not a metaphor about passivity. This is not an invitation to stop working or to abandon ambition. This is something far more precise and far more powerful than any of that. This is about the invisible signal your nervous system broadcasts to the world every time you want something too much. And once you understand that signal, you will never approach a goal, a relationship, a creative project, or a conversation the same way again. The scarcity signal, what your brain is actually saying. When you chase. Let's start here, because this is where most people get lost. When you want something urgently, a job, a partner, money, recognition, and you pursue it with relentless grinding effort, you believe you are sending the universe a message of determination. You believe the intensity of your desire proves your worthiness of the reward. But your nervous system is sending an entirely different message. Every act of frantic chasing, every obsessive check of the phone, every anxious rehearsal of what you'll say, every sleepless night calculating how to make something happen, carries an underlying emotional frequency. And that frequency whispers over and over in the language your body understands before your mind does. I don't have this yet. I am without this. This is missing from me. This is what psychologists call the scarcity mindset, and its effects on your performance, perception, and social presence are profound, measurable, and almost universally self-defeating. When your brain locks into scarcity mode, three things happen simultaneously. First, your perceptual field narrows. Neuroscience research on stress and threat response shows that when the brain perceives lack, whether it's a physical threat or an emotional one like, I might not get this job, it activates the amygdala and constricts what researchers call the attentional spotlight. You literally see less. You miss opportunities that are right in front of you. Second, your body broadcasts tension, and other people feel it. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to the physiological signals of desperation. When you walk into a room needing something from the people in it, your body language, your vocal tone, the micro-expressions that flash across your face, all of it leaks this information. People pull back, not always consciously, but they pull back. Third, your decision-making degrades. Under the pressure of scarcity thinking, the prefrontal cortex loses bandwidth. You make shorter-term, more reactive decisions. You come across as less composed, less trustworthy, less capable, which, ironically, makes you less likely to get the very thing you are chasing. This is not a character flaw. This is biology. Marcus and the Decade of Desperate Effort. Consider the story of Marcus, a 34-year-old entrepreneur from New York who spent the better part of a decade trying to build something that would matter. He was not lazy. Marcus woke before sunrise. He attended every networking event within 100 miles. He read voraciously, business books, psychology, philosophy, strategy. He took courses, hired coaches, built spreadsheets of goals, and tracked his progress with obsessive precision. But it didn't work. For 10 years, every project launched with enormous energy and collapsed under the weight of that same energy. Every partnership began with excitement and dissolved when Marcus's urgent need for the venture to succeed made him controlling, anxious, and exhausting to work with. Marcus was not failing because he lacked intelligence, effort, or vision. Marcus was failing because he had confused intensity of desire with quality of energy. Intensity of desire says, I want this so much. I need this. It has to happen. Quality of energy says, I am grounded. I trust the process. I am here, fully, without grasping. Marcus discovered this not through a book or a seminar, but through collapse. A week of forced rest changed everything. An old contact reached out about a project, not because Marcus had followed up 14 times, but because he had, for the first time in years, stopped radiating the frequency of I need something from you. Within 6 months, the partnership that resulted generated more momentum than his previous decade of grinding, not because he stopped working, but because he stopped working from a place of lack. The neurochemistry of letting go. When you are in a state of high-stakes wanting, your body maintains elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline. Sustained over time, they create a physiological environment that is the opposite of creative, flexible, and open. Chronically elevated cortisol literally restructures neural pathways. It makes the brain better at perceiving threats and worse at perceiving possibilities. Contrast this with the neurochemical state that accompanies genuine ease, what researchers call the approach state. In this state, dopamine flows freely. Oxytocin, the bonding and trust chemical, is present. The prefrontal cortex runs at full capacity. You are creative, warm, genuinely curious, and radiating the most fundamental social signal that exists. I am okay. I have enough. I am here because I choose to be, not because I need something from this. That signal, broadcast clearly and consistently, is extraordinarily powerful. It is the neurological foundation of what we might call natural authority. Wanting versus having, the energy gap that changes everything. Wanting energy is oriented toward the future. It is defined by absence. When you are in wanting energy, your entire psychological system is organized around a gap, the gap between where you are and where you wish you were. This gap feels urgent. It feels like a problem that must be solved. Having energy is oriented toward the present. It is defined by sufficiency. You still care about outcomes, but your sense of self is not conditional on those outcomes. Think about the last time you met someone who was desperate to impress you. You felt it immediately, the slight over-eagerness, the performance quality, the way they seemed to need something from the interaction. Now think about someone you met who was genuinely settled in themselves, interested in you, present, warm, but clearly not needing anything from you. How did that feel? Almost certainly you wanted to move closer. Desperation repels. Settledness attracts. Not because the universe is playing games with you, but because, on the most fundamental neurological and social level, desperation signals lack, and lack is contagious, uncomfortable, and something the human survival instinct tells us to avoid. What letting go actually means, letting go does not mean not caring. It does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It does not mean abandoning your goals. What it means, precisely and specifically, is releasing the emotional attachment to the outcome while maintaining full commitment to the process. It means the difference between a gardener who plants seeds and tends the soil with patient attention, and a gardener who digs up the seeds every morning to check whether they are growing yet. This is not a small thing to ask of a human being. It runs directly against the grain of a brain wired for threat detection and resource acquisition. But it is learnable, and the rewards of learning it are not small. The flow state secret. Why some people make success look effortless. There is a particular kind of person who seems to frustrate everyone around them. You know who I mean. They are not necessarily more talented than you. They do not appear to work longer hours. They do not seem to agonize the way you do. They make decisions with a looseness that looks almost careless, and yet those decisions tend to land well. What do they have that you don't? The answer is not confidence in the conventional sense. It is not a better network, a luckier background, or a more impressive resume. It is something far more fundamental and far more available to you than any of those things. What they have is a different relationship with outcome, and that relationship changes everything downstream. The science of effortless performance. In the 1970s, Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi began studying a question that had fascinated him since childhood. Why do certain activities produce a state of such complete absorption that people lose track of time, forget to eat, forget to worry, and simultaneously produce their best work? He called this state flow. Over decades of research across hundreds of professions, athletes, surgeons, chess grandmasters, jazz musicians, software engineers, Csikszentmihalyi identified the consistent conditions that produce this state. The flow state, the state in which human beings perform at their absolute peak, is incompatible with one specific psychological condition: outcome anxiety. The moment a surgeon begins thinking about how this operation will affect their reputation, their performance degrades. The moment a jazz musician starts wondering whether the audience is impressed, the music loses its aliveness. Peak performance, in every domain studied, required purposeful surrender, complete engagement with the activity itself, combined with a release of attachment to what that activity would produce. The people who make success look effortless are not trying less. They are trying differently. They have learned to decouple their sense of self from the result of their efforts. Sophia's silence. Sophia had been writing since she was 19 years old. By her early 30s, she had completed 3 novels and accumulated a collection of rejection letters that could paper a small apartment wall in Barcelona where she lived. She wanted to be published. But somewhere along the way, the wanting had colonized the writing itself. Every sentence was evidence of whether she was good enough. Every chapter was a test. Every draft was an audition for a life she felt she deserved but could not reach. The writing became stiff. She tried harder. She woke earlier. She read more books on craft. She hired a writing coach. Nothing opened. The breakthrough came through her mother's illness. 3 weeks in a small coastal town, long walks by the sea, cooking, listening to stories she'd never heard before. No time for the anxious, calculating version of her creativity. On the 15th day, she opened her laptop to write an email and wrote something else entirely. A scene, 4 hours without stopping. When she looked up, the light had changed, and she had produced something she knew, with a certainty she hadn't felt in years, was genuinely alive. That scene became the opening of a novel completed in 11 months. The editor who acquired it told Sophia that what struck her most was its complete lack of self-consciousness. It reads like the writer forgot to be afraid. Sophia had not stopped caring about her writing. She had stopped needing it to save her. And in that release, everything she had been trying to force simply arrived. Why desperate energy pushes people away? Desperate energy is socially toxic. Not because the people broadcasting it are bad people, but because on the most primal level of human social interaction, desperation reads as a signal that something is fundamentally wrong in romantic relationships. It is the most documented phenomenon in the psychology of attraction. The person who needs the relationship to work, who broadcasts through every text and every conversation that their sense of self is contingent on this other person's approval, systematically produces the opposite of what they want. In professional settings, the same dynamic operates. The job candidate who radiates, "I need this offer," almost always performs worse than the candidate who thinks, "I am here to find out whether this is right for both of us." In creative work, the audience can feel it too. Work made from a place of desperate need for approval carries a quality of strain that the most technically accomplished execution cannot fully conceal. None of this recommends pretending you don't care. It is about something deeper, genuinely relocating your sense of worth from the outcome of your interactions to the quality of your presence within them. Nathan's control room. Nathan ran a hedge fund in London. Successful, but success for Nathan had a particular and exhausting quality. It required constant maintenance. Every morning he reviewed positions, news feeds, analyst reports, risk metrics. He had built models upon models, contingency plans for his contingency plans. His relationship with uncertainty was essentially adversarial. His best days, the days when he saw patterns that others missed, when his thinking had a clarity that felt almost effortless, shared a common quality. He was interested rather than afraid, curious rather than vigilant, playing rather than defending. The turning point came during a forced vacation. His first real holiday in 4 years, taken only because his doctor had been unusually direct about the cardiovascular consequences of his current schedule. On a beach in the Algarve, with his phone deliberately left in the hotel safe, Nathan spent 3 days thinking without stakes. Ideas came, connections between things he had been too stressed to see. A clarity about the fund's strategic direction that no amount of anxious analysis had produced. He returned to London with a framework that, over the following 18 months, became the most successful period in the fund's history. Not because he had stopped being rigorous, but because he had stopped confusing rigor with fear. The identity shift from "I want" to "I am." Most people approach their goals from the outside in. They think, "When I get the thing, I will become the person who has it. When I get the job, I will become successful. When I find the partner, I will become lovable." This seems logical, but it is functionally backwards. The shift that changes everything is the shift from "I want to become" to "I already am, and I am moving in this direction." It means the entrepreneur who says, not "I am trying to build something that matters," but "I am someone who builds things that matter," and this is the current expression of that. You are not chasing the life you want. You are building right now, in this moment, the person who lives it. And the person who lives it does not chase. They move, they create, they engage, and they trust. The power of stillness. How silence becomes your greatest strategy. We live in a culture that is deeply, almost pathologically uncomfortable with stillness. From the moment we wake, often before we have even fully surfaced from sleep, we reach for stimulation. A phone, a notification, a news feed, something to fill the space that might otherwise be occupied by nothing more than our own quiet minds. And then we wonder why we feel perpetually behind, why our best ideas seem to arrive in the shower, or on a walk, or in that hazy territory between waking and sleep, rather than at our desks during the hours we have specifically allocated to thinking. The answer is not complicated, but it runs against almost everything our culture tells us about productivity. Your most powerful cognitive and creative processes do not happen when you are actively pushing. They happen in the spaces between the pushing. The brain's default mode network, the system that activates during rest, during mind wandering, during the absence of directed effort, is responsible for some of the most sophisticated processing the human brain performs: pattern recognition, creative synthesis, emotional processing, long-range planning. None of this happens under pressure. All of it requires space. Victor and the silence. He almost missed. Victor was the kind of person who treated sleep as an unfortunate biological requirement that cut into his working hours. As the chief executive of a technology company in Tokyo, he had built his reputation on relentless intensity. His calendar was a mosaic of back-to-back commitments. The few gaps that appeared were immediately filled. His assistant had learned that leaving empty space was a category of professional failure. The decisions that had always come naturally now felt labored. Every major choice required committees, analyses, revision upon revision. What Victor did not understand, what nobody had the courage to tell him, was that he had scheduled the clarity out of existence. Victor's turning point was medical, a viral infection that left him bedridden for 5 days with nothing but his own thoughts and a window overlooking a courtyard garden. His phone was in the next room. For the first time in approximately 11 years, he had no choice but to simply exist without agenda. It was, by his own account, genuinely terrifying for the first 2 days. By the 3rd day, something shifted. The constant commentary of tasks, threats, metrics, obligations gradually quieted. In that quiet, he saw, with sudden and undeniable clarity, a structural problem in the company's market positioning that he had been circling around for 2 years without naming. He saw the solution not as a complex strategic framework, but as a simple, obvious repositioning. The 5 days of stillness cost him nothing in real terms, and gave him, in the most practical possible sense, everything. Lena and the space between notes. There is a saying among musicians that the music is not in the notes. The music is in the silence between the notes. Lena had trained at a conservatory in Vienna from the age of 8. By her mid-20s, she was performing at a professional level that most musicians spend entire careers working toward. And yet something was missing. The technical execution was beyond criticism, but there was a quality, a living presence that she heard in recordings of the musicians she most admired, that her own playing lacked. She practiced more, worked with additional coaches, studied interpretation, phrasing, historical performance practice. Nothing bridged the gap. The shift came at a small, informal gathering at a colleague's home in the hills outside Vienna. She arrived tired from travel, slightly underprepared without the armored focus she typically brought to performance. She sat at the piano, and instead of beginning, she simply paused. Not strategically, not as a technique. She paused because in that moment she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel during performance. She was moved. The silence before her first note lasted perhaps 4 seconds longer than any silence she had allowed in a public setting before. And in those 4 seconds, the room changed. The audience became suddenly and completely still. Afterward, a woman came to find her. She said only this: "I don't know what you did tonight, but it felt like you were speaking directly to me." That was the quality Lena had been looking for, and it arrived not through more effort, but through the willingness to be still. Dr. Eliot and the Observer Effect. In a research laboratory at Cambridge University, a physicist named Dr. Eliot spent years studying the behavior of quantum particles, specifically the deeply strange phenomenon that occurs when those particles are observed. What he was documenting had been known in physics since the early 20th century. The act of observation changes what is observed. A quantum particle, unmeasured, exists in a state of superposition. The moment it is measured, the moment a conscious observer interacts with it, it collapses into a single, definite state. What fascinated Dr. Eliot was not the particle physics. It was the resonance with something contemplatives had been saying for thousands of years. Attention changes what it touches. When you observe your thoughts, when you step back from the automatic stream of mental content and become the awareness watching the thoughts rather than the thoughts themselves, something fundamental shifts. The thoughts do not disappear, but their relationship to you changes. I am my thoughts implies I am the awareness within which thoughts arise. This single shift is the foundation of virtually every contemplative tradition in human history. A practice, the open palm. Here is a practice. It takes approximately 5 minutes. You can do it anywhere, at any time. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Bring to mind something you want very much, the real one, the one that carries the most charge. Notice what happens in your body as you hold this. Where does the tension live? The shoulders, perhaps, the jaw, the belly. Now, in your imagination, take that goal and place it in your open hands, not a clenched fist. Open palms, held gently in front of you, and say, silently or aloud, "This matters to me. I am moving toward it with everything I have, and I release my grip on exactly when and how it arrives." Notice what happens in your body. A slight release of tension, a breath that goes slightly deeper, a quality of spaciousness in the chest. That is your nervous system shifting from scarcity mode to approach mode, from threat response to open engagement. This is not magic. This is physiology. A genuine pause. Right here, in this exact moment, I want to ask you something directly. If what you have been reading is landing, if somewhere in these words you are recognizing something true about your own experience, then I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me which part hit closest to home, and share this with one person you know who is caught in the exhausting cycle of pushing too hard for things that keep retreating. Your presence here already matters. I mean that precisely, not politely. Now let's keep going, because what comes next may be the part that changes the most. The authenticity advantage. When you stop performing, everything changes. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how many hours you have worked or how little sleep you have gotten. It is the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that you believe the world requires, rather than simply being the version that actually exists. Most people carry this exhaustion so constantly that they have stopped recognizing it as exhaustion. It has become the baseline. But here is what that performance costs you, beyond the obvious toll on your energy and your sense of self. It costs you results, in a precise, measurable, entirely practical sense. Because the performance of a self is one of the most effective ways known to human psychology of preventing the very response you are performing to obtain. People do not connect with performances, they connect with presences. Ray, and the day he stopped selling, Ray had been in sales for 18 years, technically good. Every script, every objection handling framework, every closing technique. His numbers were fine, consistently fine, not spectacular, just fine. Underneath the polished technique, there was a signal broadcasting continuously from somewhere deeper than conscious intention. I need you to say yes. My livelihood depends on it. Please say yes. He did not know he was broadcasting this, but every person he sat across from received it. The shift came through illness. A persistent flu kept Ray off work for 4 days. He returned genuinely depleted, real, cellular exhaustion. He had no energy for technique, no reserves for strategy. He sat across from his first client and simply told the truth. He said he had been sick and wasn't quite at full capacity. He asked questions not because the training said to, but because he was too tired to do anything except listen. He did not close that meeting with a sale, but the client called back 2 days later. Then again. 6 weeks later, they signed the largest contract of his career. The client told him directly over coffee. Every salesperson I meet, I can feel them wanting something from me the moment they walk in. You were the first one in years who felt like you were actually there to help me figure something out. That made me trust you." Ray spent the following year, systematically, unlearning 18 years of technique, replacing it with genuine curiosity, grounded confidence, and the settled energy of someone who did not need the sale to be okay. His numbers increased by 40%, not because he worked harder, because he stopped performing and started being. Kai and the body that already knew. Kai had been competing in martial arts since he was 11 years old. Training in Seoul by his mid-20s, he was considered one of the most technically accomplished practitioners of his generation. And yet, in competition, in the moments that mattered most, something consistently went wrong. A tightening, a slight slowing. He was running at perhaps 80% of what he was capable of in training. The breakthrough came from his coach, a quiet man in his 60s who said simply, "You already know how to do this. The problem is that in competition, you stop trusting that you know." In the week before a major competition, his coach offered a single reframe. Stop trying to perform well. Start trying to find out what happens when you let your body do what it already knows. The distinction is not subtle. Perform well places the outcome in the foreground. Find out what happens places genuine curiosity in the foreground. It removes the evaluative pressure that creates the tightening. Kai walked into that competition with one thought: find out what happens. What happened was the best performance of his career. Professor Adrian and the hunger for recognition. There is a particular species of suffering especially common among people of genuine intelligence and genuine accomplishment: the suffering of not being recognized for what you actually are. Professor Adrian had spent 23 years at Oxford producing work he knew, with clear-eyed accuracy, was significant, not merely competent, genuinely, unusually good, and yet the recognition remained consistently just out of reach. He submitted papers to prominent journals with painful care, attended every conference where the right people would be present. He had a spreadsheet which, when he eventually shared it with a trusted colleague, caused the colleague to wince. Tracking every submission, every response, every calculated probability. The spreadsheet was not a productivity tool. It was a monument to anxiety. He closed it, not temporarily, permanently. He declined 2 conference invitations he'd accepted not because the conversations interested him, but because the right people would be in the room. He returned to a question that had fascinated him years earlier, abandoned because it seemed too speculative. He worked on it for 8 months, without strategy, without a target journal. The paper he produced was the best thing he had written in 15 years. Within 18 months it had been cited more than anything else in his career. The hunger for approval, when it becomes the primary driver of your work, is the most reliable way to produce work that does not deserve it. Daniel and the Self-Improvement Trap. In a suburb of Sydney, a 38-year-old man named Daniel had built what looked, from the outside, like an extraordinarily committed relationship with his own development. His mornings began at 5 with a sequence of practices refined over years: meditation, journaling, exercise, cold exposure, visualization, affirmations. He was trying harder at self-improvement than almost anyone he knew. And he was, beneath all of it, more persistently unhappy than most of them, too. Every morning, practice was implicitly preceded by the same unexamined premise: the person I am right now is not adequate, and the purpose of this practice is to correct that inadequacy. His therapist said something so simple he almost dismissed it. What would it mean to treat yourself as someone who is already fundamentally okay, and to practice from that place rather than practicing in order to become okay? Daniel did not stop his practices. but he stopped doing them as acts of correction. He started doing them as acts of care. The change in how he felt was immediate. You do not earn the right to feel okay, you choose it. And that choice, made genuinely, is the foundation on which everything else can actually be built. Isabel and the walls that kept her safe and empty. Isabel had built her walls so carefully over so many years that she had almost forgotten they were walls. She called them discernment, standards, the hard-won wisdom of someone who had been hurt before. In Paris, where she worked as an architect, she moved through the world with an elegance that concealed, from most people, the degree to which she was perpetually on guard. Every potential partner was evaluated against a mental checklist so comprehensive that no human being could consistently satisfy it. The walls worked perfectly for the purpose she had built them for. What they also did, with the mechanical efficiency of structures that do exactly what they are designed to do, was prevent every genuine connection she had been waiting for. The change came through an encounter so ordinary that she was almost embarrassed afterward by how much it mattered. A pipe burst, 2 hours working with the building superintendent, a quiet man named Etienne, moving her drawings to safety, managing the water. In those 2 hours, in the practical necessity of the situation, Isabel's walls were simply not relevant. There was no time for the calculation of risk and management of impression. She experienced something she had not felt in a very long time, the simple pleasure of being genuinely present with another person, without agenda, without performance. Something had shifted. She was capable of this. She had forgotten that. The decision to begin, carefully, imperfectly, with full acknowledgement of the risk, dismantling the walls, was quiet, terrifying, the most courageous thing she had done in years. You cannot receive what you will not allow to reach you. This is not a paradox. It is geometry. The final surrender. When letting go becomes your greatest power. We have traveled a considerable distance together in this conversation. We have looked at the neuroscience of scarcity thinking and the physiological cost of chronic chasing. We have examined why desperate energy repels the very things it seeks. We have met people who discovered, each in their own way, that the path to what they most wanted ran directly through the willingness to stop needing it quite so urgently. But there is a final layer, the deepest one and perhaps the most difficult to fully absorb, that we have not yet reached. It is the layer of genuine trust. Not trust as a technique, not trust as a strategy for getting what you want more effectively, but trust as a fundamental orientation toward life. Thomas and the Alpine Bridge. In the mountain passes of the Alps, where old trade routes wound through narrow valleys, there was once a merchant named Thomas who had built everything he had with his own hands. He had started with nothing, no inheritance, no connections, no particular advantages beyond an acute intelligence and a willingness to work without self-pity in conditions that defeated most people around him. Over 30 years, he had accumulated wealth that would have been unimaginable to the boy he had once been. He carried that wealth with him on his journeys because losing it was unthinkable. And it was precisely this unthinkability that nearly killed him. Crossing a high alpine bridge in late autumn, a narrow structure stretched across a gorge so deep the sound of the river below was swallowed by distance. The wind came in lateral gusts that turned the crossing into something closer to combat. Halfway across, the weight of everything Thomas was carrying began to work against him. His hands, white-knuckled on the rope guide, could not help because they were occupied with holding the pack, containing everything he could not afford to lose. He stopped, in the middle of the bridge, in the middle of the wind, and he understood, with the clarity that sometimes arrives only at the intersection of genuine danger and genuine stillness, that the thing he was most afraid of losing was precisely the thing that was making him unable to move. He unbuckled the pack, set it down on the bridge boards, carefully, with full awareness of what he was doing, took a slow breath, placed both hands on the guide rope, and he crossed. When he reached the other side, he turned and looked back. The pack, impossibly, improbably, was still there. He waited for the wind to quiet, walked back, retrieved it, and continued his journey. Nothing had been lost, but something had been permanently learned. The things we cling to most desperately are sometimes the precise weight that prevents us from reaching the other side. The money paradox. Why abundance avoids people who need it. Let us talk directly about money, because it is perhaps the domain in which the paradox of effort manifests most clearly. People who are in a state of chronic financial anxiety, who think about money constantly, monitor it obsessively, make decisions driven primarily by the fear of not having enough, do not, on average, accumulate it more effectively than people who have a calmer relationship with their financial reality. Chronic financial anxiety narrows the cognitive aperture. It produces short-term, reactive decision-making. It damages professional relationships because the desperate quality of financial need broadcasts itself in every negotiation, every pitch. The psychologist Sendil Mullainathan demonstrated something remarkable. People cognitively consumed by lack lose the equivalent of roughly 13 IQ points in fluid intelligence. 13 points. The difference between average performance and significantly impaired performance. The irony is complete and somewhat brutal. The people who most need financial relief are least able to think their way toward it, precisely because the need for financial relief is consuming the cognitive resources required to generate it. The release from this trap is not to stop caring about money. It is to find through whatever genuine means are available, a psychological ground not organized around financial lack. Not because this shift will cause money to appear from nowhere, but because it will restore the cognitive capacity that anxiety has been consuming. The relationship between letting go and genuine ambition. Ambition is not the problem. Dependency is. Ambition, the genuine desire to build something, create something, achieve something, is one of the most beautiful qualities a human being can possess. The world needs ambitious people. You need your own ambition. None of what we have been discussing requires you to diminish it. What creates the paradox of effort is not ambition itself. It is the specific psychological structure in which the ambition is held. The difference between I want to build something significant and I am committed to doing that work, and I need to build something significant because without it I am not okay. The first is ambition. The second is dependency. Ambition energizes. Dependency depletes. The question to ask yourself is not, do I want this enough? You probably want it plenty. The question is, am I okay if this particular version on this particular timeline does not arrive? Not am I indifferent to it, but am I intact without it? 5 practices for daily life. Everything in this conversation points toward this: how to actually live this principle day to day in the specific and concrete circumstances of your specific and concrete life. The first practice is the morning reset. Before you reach for your phone, take 3 minutes. Sit, breathe. Ask yourself one question. What am I chasing today that I could instead move toward? The difference between chasing and moving toward is the difference between running from something and walking toward something. The second practice is the recognition inventory. Once a day, ideally when the scarcity thinking is loudest, take 2 minutes to list 5 things that are already working. Not in a forced affirmation way, in the genuinely honest way of someone trying to accurately perceive reality. Scarcity thinking systematically distorts perception toward lack. This is a correction for that distortion. The third practice is the release breath. When you notice outcome anxiety, when the shoulders are up, the jaw is set, the thoughts cycling for the fifth time, stop. Take one deliberate breath noticeably slower and deeper than your current pattern. As you exhale, consciously release the muscular tension in your shoulders, your hands, your face. The body leads the mind. Use it. The fourth practice is the process redirect. When you catch yourself obsessing about an outcome, ask a single redirecting question. What is one thing I can do in the next hour that serves the process, regardless of whether it changes the outcome timeline? This redirects attention from the outcome, which you cannot control, to the process, which you can. The fifth practice is the sufficiency statement. Once a week, in a moment of genuine quiet, complete this sentence in writing. Regardless of whether specific goal arrives, I am already something true about who you are. Not who you will be when you get there, who you already are. The paradox fully stated. The paradox of effort is not that effort is bad. It is that effort deployed from the wrong psychological ground is self-defeating, not occasionally, not in some circumstances, but systematically and reliably, across every domain of human endeavor. The wrong ground is the ground of lack, of I need this to be okay, of desperate wanting that broadcasts, to every nervous system in range, the frequency of insufficiency. The right ground is the ground of sufficiency, of I am already fundamentally intact, and I am moving toward this because it matters to me, not because I require it in order to exist. From that ground, effort becomes clean, presence becomes available, creativity becomes accessible, resilience becomes natural, and joy becomes available in the present moment rather than perpetually deferred to the arrival of something not yet here. The water in the open palm. We began with water. We began with the image of something precious slipping through clenched fingers and gathering, seemingly of its own accord, in an open and relaxed hand. You have been chasing things your whole life. Some of them you have caught. Some of them have eluded you with a consistency that, if you are honest, does not feel entirely random. What would it mean to open your hands? Thomas crossed his bridge, not by holding tighter, but by setting down the weight long enough to use his hands for what hands are actually for. Sophia wrote her novel. Not by grinding harder, but by remembering what it felt like to write because the writing mattered. Marcus built his business in the 18 months after he stopped needing it to define him. Kai competed with the open curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to find out what his trained body would do when he trusted it. And you, in whatever specific form the paradox of effort is currently playing out in your life, you already know what needs to be released. You have known it for some time. The question is not whether you know. The question is whether you are ready, finally, to open your hands. A final word. The principle we have been exploring is not new. It appears in the Tao Te Ching's concept of Wu Wei, action without forcing. In the Bhagavad Gita's instruction to act without attachment to the fruits of action. In the Stoic distinction between what is and is not within our control. It is not new because it reflects something permanent about the structure of human experience, about the way the nervous system responds to threat and to ease, about the way other people respond to desperation and to groundedness. What is perhaps new is that we now have the neuroscience to explain why these ancient observations are accurate. The mechanism was always operating. Now we can see it clearly. You do not need to want things less. You need to need them differently. The river does not force its way to the sea. It finds the path of least resistance and flows. It does not stop moving. It does not become indifferent to its direction. It simply does not fight the landscape it is moving through. You are the river. Stop fighting the landscape. Open your hands and watch what gathers there.